TAG Heuer. Why does it get so much hate? TAG Heuer as a brand has everything watch aficionados look for. Heritage, strong links with motorsport, they're key factors in innovation with movements like the Caliber 11. Some of their watches have even been to space.
Yet modern day TAG Heuer gets slandered by modern day collectors.
First things first, what are you wearing today, Tom?
I am wearing one of the brand new Heuer 2 Carreras. The in-house movement, which we will come on to, in my opinion, is Heuer craftsmanship back at its finest. So I think the green dial that comes with this watch,
it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's its number one selling point.
Yeah. And I think this is an example of the TAG Heuer watches people should be buying.
What are you wearing?
I am wearing one of the first watches I ever owned, probably the first great watch I ever owned. My 18 karat gold 1980s Omega de Ville Prestige. Quartz, as it's a sign of the times, the 80s and the quartz crisis. It's simple, it's beautiful, and I love it.
So Edward Heuer founded his first watchmaking business in the 1860s in Switzerland. He patented the oscillating pinion, which is a key part of modern watches, and he also went on in the late 1890s to create his first ever chronograph.
Edward Heuer actually died in 1892, shortly after releasing his first chronograph, but luckily his sons decided to take up the family business and shortly followed with the Time Trip, a Swiss chronograph that was made for dashboard use within motor racing, and this was TAG Heuer's, or should I say Heuer's, first step into the motor racing world.
But what they're most famous for in 1916 is actually creating the micrograph, which was the first stopwatch accurate to 1/100 of a second. This is very serious watchmaking know-how from, at the time, a watchmaking powerhouse. Yet modern TAG Heuer is barely even considered an entry-level luxury watch brand.
The difference between TAG Heuer and Heuer is quite a margin though.
So this key success of being able to establish both motorsport and watchmaking into one led to rapid growth for Heuer in the 1920s. This led on to in 1933 Heuer creating one of their most famous lines, the Ortavia, used for motorsports racing, boats and aircraft.
The excellent reputation of Heuer chronographs continued to grow, and eventually even the 34th President of the United States jumped on the bandwagon. General Eisenhower himself bought a Heuer reference 2447 and wore it. I'll cut that bit out. Everyone knows the presidential watch has been a Rolex day-date.
Yeah.
But now we can see that this president was wearing Heuer chronographs, and it wasn't just him, was it?
No, there was also Truman, the 33rd President of the United States, that also wore a solid 18 karat gold Heuer watch as well. The movements in these Heuer chronographs, the Valjoux 72, was also used in what other watch?
Some of the original Rolex Daytonas.
It's also really important to remember at this point that Heuer was still just Heuer. It was still a family-owned business, and in the early 1960s, the most famous Heuer then joined the business, Jack Heuer, and he was responsible for arguably the most important time in Heuer history. So when Jack Heuer joined the business in 1961, he made an immediate impact. In the following year, he was responsible for creating one of the most iconic Heuer chronographs of all time, the Ortavia. Taking the name from the dashboard chronos that we mentioned previously, he then created one of the most beautiful vintage chronographs ever made. 38mm case, Dauphine hands, big white subdials, that panda dial effect which went on to be so famous. And this watch was targeted at pretty much everybody. Divers, scientists, racing drivers, and it still used those extremely iconic Valjoux movements.
The Ortavia became an icon, and Heuer's success as a brand was really boosted when they took over the Formula One scene. Drivers such as Joe Sifra wore Heuer chronographs in one of the most dangerous and exciting sports in the world. Where did it all go wrong? During the quartz crisis in the 80s, Heuer fell into some financial difficulties. They tried to keep up with the production of digital watches, but it simply wasn't enough. And in 1982, they were sold to Piaget. And this could arguably be the start of Heuer's downfall.
3 years later, Piaget then sold Heuer to Technique Avant-Garde, and the watch house was rebranded TAG Heuer.
From the moment it became TAG Heuer, it immediately became about making money and not about making watches, in my personal opinion. The logo was changed to green and red, which in my opinion ruined the aesthetic of so many watches.
Also, from looking within the watch industry, TAG Heuer took inspiration from Swatch watches. They removed the beautiful craftsmanship that went into their iconic racing chronographs and produced the Formula One collection, a watch simply made of fiberglass, plastic and other cheap materials. Although this was a huge success, with over 3 million Formula Ones being sold, the beautiful craftsmanship that we'd seen from Jack Heuer and his family had unfortunately been lost.
In 1987, the SEL was launched and it was worn by one of the most fantastic racing drivers of all time, Ayrton Senna. But unfortunately, it was ugly. It's one of the most disgusting bracelets and cases, to be honest, that I've ever seen. And this could well be one of the contributing factors into why TAG Heuer's reputation started to head downwards from here on out.
It was during this time that they continued to use quartz chronograph movements. The beautiful automatic and manual wind movements we'd seen had pretty much been forgotten. And one thing I want to say is, having linked some of the SEL bracelets in my time to the man that created that bracelet, f*** you. It's the worst bracelet I've ever had to link. I have put numerous screwdrivers into my fingers and it's not even good looking. It's a ugly watch and a ugly bracelet. TAG Heuer was now making what can only be described as really ugly watches.
Yeah, ugly.
They did go on to have two very successful marketing campaigns. The most famous being from the 90s, Don't Crack Under Pressure, which is actually what they still run with today. TAG saw huge success. TAG Heuer went from being worth 66 million Swiss francs to over 400 million Swiss francs. It's now just a money printing machine.
Do you think, even though these watches were disgusting, because it was something new, people may be a bit blind to it?
Yeah.
And now in retrospect, when you see the watches that are coming out now, or even when we hark back to watches of old, people are going, oh, maybe not. Well, I think as well, because everyone else on the circuit was wearing them, because their favourite racing drivers were wearing them.
Yeah.
That's why people were wearing these arguably disgusting watches.
Well, even though Senna and the likes was wearing them at these points, they were just producing cheap watches. But that's the key thing. These watches were considerably cheaper than the watches that they were making under Jack Heuer's reign. TAG Heuer went on to become one of the top 5 Swiss watch brands in the world.
Do you think maybe it was a domino effect of now the TAG Heuer name was at a more affordable price, and it became popular by proxy because more people could now buy it?
You've got kids who saw Steve McQueen in Le Mans in the 70s wearing a Heuer Monaco, and now they could wear a TAG Heuer watch for a few £100s.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people that jumped on that craze. The key thing with Heuer was always craftsmanship, and there was no real craftsmanship that went into these watches. TAG Heuer went back into the history books. We saw re-editions of the Carrera, re-editions of the Heuer Monaco. It was also at this time that they bought the rights for Steve McQueen and were able to use him in their marketing campaigns. The ship had already sailed, too little, too late, and the Heuer brand had been considerably cheapened by Technique Avant-Garde. Following on from this, in 1999, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, LVMH, then bought out TAG Heuer from Technique Avant-Garde. LVMH made it their mission to try and save the TAG Heuer brand. In their early stages, they made some questionable decisions. As a positive, they did introduce the Zenith El Primero movement to TAG Heuer, the Monza chronograph. However, they also took the piss.
Yeah, they decided to take one of their most famous and most loved watches, the TAG Heuer Monaco, and they decided to make it digital. They decided to make it flip over, and in that sense, they decided to call it
the 69. They genuinely made a watch that could turn upside down and inside out like a reverso and name it after a sexual innuendo.
Nice job, LVMH. Now, in the timeline of TAG Heuer, we're not that far away from modern watches now. I think the main reason they're not as popular as they necessarily should be is because they keep making the same mistakes. It's all about their design at this point. I think they use the wrong proportions. We're starting to see watches slim back down now. Tudor bringing out the 39mm Pelagos. 38mm watches are becoming more and more popular. If they really listen to what people wanted and maybe decide to be a bit more self-critical, they could produce a lot more sales and produce a lot more handsome watches.
I think LVMH did make one or two good decisions. One decision that they made is they actually brought back Jack Heuer as an honorary chairman. It brought the family heirloom back into the business and allowed him to have some influence over the watches that were being created.
So why do you think under LVMH, TAG Heuer wasn't really working as a brand and wasn't really respected?
They lost completely their DNA. They were switching from ambassador to ambassador. One week you'd see Leonardo DiCaprio and Cara Delevingne posing with Formula One and Carreras. The next week you'd see a plastic watch with influence by Cristiano Ronaldo that they couldn't sell for love nor money. They went from making movements with Zenith to then making their own own movements, then going back to Zenith. We saw Grand Carreras that were meant to be fabulous watchmaking, which had no real influence from TAG at all.
Yeah.
The DNA was completely lost. The Jack Heuer effect was gone. However, since Jean-Claude Beaver came back in 2015, we've seen positive changes. I think one really positive thing that we've seen is them partnering with Porsche.
Yeah. Definitely.
This allows them to focus on their Carrera heritage. They made some beautiful re-editions of vintage Heuers from that era, but it also allows them to focus on modern TAG Heuer as well. They produce some beautiful in-house Heuer O2 chronograph movements, chronometer certified, 80-hour power reserves, column wheels. We've even seen them creating tourbillons at accessible price points. The focus of innovation seems to be back. The focus on their racing and heritage DNA has returned. They're now with arguably the most popular racing driver in the world, Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
He wears a Heuer, everybody in that team wears a Heuer, and it's now bringing people who have that motor racing DNA back to the brand. When you see brands with strong motor racing DNA, even brands with weaker DNA, such as Rolex, with huge success with the Daytona, TAG Heuer need to capitalise on that. And I finally feel that is something that they're beginning to do. They're actually making good movements again.
I think TAG Heuer still have a long way to go, but they're on the right trajectory.
You and I have absolutely slandered SELs and professional series, but I'm sat here wearing the new green dial Heuer O2.
The reason we brought something like this into our online watch shop is because we think it signifies the change that TAG Heuer needed to bring. It signifies the DNA that TAG Heuer lost and is basically the essence of what TAG Heuer should be, hence our decision to bring it into the shop.
We actually have a Monaco Gulf in the shop at the moment.
Another great watch.
It's a truly awesome watch. It has everything that Heuer was about. The Gulf DNA. What did Steve McQueen drive? He drove a Porsche Gulf in the Le Mans movie. It's got everything that Heuer should be focusing on in one watch. We've seen it with the O2, we've seen it with the Monaco, and I'm really glad to say I finally believe that TAG Heuer are turning over a new leaf. If they stay on the trajectory that they're on, and they continue to grow in the UK, which we have seen, I believe they can finally start making watches that justify the TAG Heuer price tag.
Remember to like and subscribe, it really helps us keep bringing you these watch videos.
And as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.